welcome everyone to Fort William Henry's Conference Center. What a great group. We always love it when the people are geeks like we are about history, so welcome to our geeky history world. On behalf of Fort William Henry, the French and Indian War Society, and mostly the Battlefield Alliance. I'm Kathy Munsell, I'm the CEO of Fort William Henry, and I want to welcome you, as I just have. And I want to give you a couple bits of information. We have scheduled our capitulation, our surrender for tomorrow, and we have moved it. It has been moved to Saturday at noon, correct, Ken?
Yes.
Saturday at noon, so we'd love to have you there. It'll start out in front of the fort at noon. We also have a community day, which is the 17th and 18th of August, and we welcome anyone from our local counties, Warren, Washington, Saratoga, to come to the fort for free. On 8/17, we have Refighting the Siege. It's a wargaming event using the scale model of Fort William Henry created by the gamer Steve Caselli. On 8/23, the Last Mohicans 4D experience will take place. The tickets are available online. The doors open at 7:15 for an 8:15 show. 9/14 and 9/28, we have wonderful seminars run by Joe Sarzinski. 9/19, 7 o'clock, there will be a special event at the Fort William Henry Conference Center with Len Travers. 9/20 to 9/21 is the French and Indian War encampment and reenactment at Rogers Island. And on our property on the 12th and 13th of October, we will be having our first annual Harvest Moon Colonial Fair. I would like to recognize some of our esteemed government officials. We have Senator Neil Breslin, who will be retiring this year, joining us. Here. We have our esteemed Queensbury Supervisor, John Stroud, also joining us. He's also on the French and Indian War Society Board and a wonderful contributor to history and tourism in the whole area. Did I miss anybody else? Anybody else hiding here? Okay. With that, I think I'll turn it over to John. And again, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Kathy. It's such a terrific thing to have a turnout night like this. I was saying to Kathy and Ken just a short time ago, we did have about 15 cancellations today because of the weather. And so it goes, you know, I mean, you don't plan on weather cancellations in August like you do in January, but the hardy ones are here, the real history aficionados, and we appreciate that. We also appreciate the partnership we have with Fort William Henry and the French and Indian War Society. And Kathy, Ken Mark, Andrew Menzie in particular have been instrumental in orchestrating this event with us. And we look forward to a lot more partnership with them. As Kathy and I like to say when we meet, the rising tide floats all boats. And what's good for one historical organization is good for history in general. And that's what we believe. And I think on behalf of all the organizations here that are represented, that's truly the case, that we need to band together. We have such a unique culture, a unique set of historic sites in Warren County, Washington County, Saratoga County, the Northeast region, and even into Vermont, that it's important that we complement each other in every way we can. So thank you for that partnership, Kathy and Ken and Andrew. Do the commercial for the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance now. You saw our literature on the table as you headed in, I hope. And we have a lot going on. One of the things we've emphasized through the efforts of our Board of Trustees is, in addition to the public programs such as this one, we do things for members. And we had a very popular floating history tour, a tour of the southern basin of Lake George back in June. And it literally sold out within 10 hours of announcing it. We ran 2 on consecutive days. And it was so popular, the folks were so ready, and I know many of you who are here got to take those tours. And we've just scheduled another one on September the 4th. Again, the members, the people who are on the waiting list for the first 2 are getting the first crack this time. But if you're a member, or should you join the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, you know, I think it'll be an excellent event to experience. And really seeing things from the water is so much better and so much more unique than just seeing what we routinely see from the land. Our Lake George Battlefield Park Visitor Center is open 10 to 4 every day, Thursday through Monday, closed on Tuesday and Wednesday. The exhibits, the mementos, and certainly the artifacts we have there are all, I think, of interest to people who love the 18th century war memorabilia and exhibits that we have here. So I encourage you to go over there. We have some very new things over the last couple of months that are of interest as well. What else do we have? We have in fact, this presentation is being videotaped. It will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, which we do now for all of our public presentations. So go to YouTube, Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, and you can view the public presentations and video that we've had. And also our weekly radio program. Bruce Venter and I are on Lake George Radio every Saturday at 9:45 a.m. That's 93.5 FM. If you're local, online, they stream, lakegeorgeradio.com, and we are live Saturday at 9:45, but we also upload past programs, audio of those. So if you want to hear Pam Collier's segment a few weeks ago on the archaeology that's taking place at Fort William Henry, for example, that's up there now. So there's a lot we have going on. One thing I wanted to emphasize to folks, particularly the local folks, over the last 5 years, there's been an ongoing effort to first recover and now reinter the 44 sets of remains that were discovered in Cortlandt Street, just a little bit west of here, back in 2019. In April, we were successful in convincing the state of New York through the Adirondack Park Agency and DEC to approve their reburial in Lake George Battlefield Park. And Kathy has been part of the committee. I've been part of the committee. Several of our trustees have been on, including Marky Mannix, the town historian who's here. So we're planning a 2026 Memorial Day reinterment ceremony. A lot needs to go into to make that happen. We're in the process now of beginning to raise money. We expect to get some significant grants from the state and federal sources, but we're going to have to supplement that, certainly to do the construction, but also to maintain the site, to be sure it's properly taken care of in the future after that ceremony takes place. So there's a brochure on the table out there. Repose of the Fallen is the project's name. I'd encourage you to contribute to that as your means allow you to. Let me see what else I wanted to touch base on. There's one of the older issues of our Fort George Post, our newsletter, is out on the table there. If you're not a member, you can see the quality of what we produce twice a year. We're very proud of that. I think that's everything I wanted to cover. Just a final thing, in addition to, was there a question?
Yeah.
Saratoga tour coming up.
The tour?
Saratoga.
Oh, Saratoga Battlefield Tour. September 28th, members only event, free. We will have Larry Arnold, our trustee, who is a licensed guide, or has been for over 20 years at Saratoga Battlefield, taking a personal caravan tour of members. We already have a lot of people signed up for that. The more the merrier, as Larry says. So we want to encourage you to join, number one, and to sign up if you have the available to do that. Is it Saturday or Thursday?
Saturday.
Okay, Saturday. We're also on October the 10th, a Thursday. We're just announcing this now, a tour of Washington County Revolutionary War sites. It'll probably take about 3 to 4 hours, similarly in a caravan format, and Pat Niles, another of our trustees, is going to lead that. Pat is the president of the Washington County Historical Society. So we have a lot going on, and I encourage you to go to our website, lakegeorgebattlefield.org, pick up our literature, and certainly join the Alliance if you're so inclined. So now to the topic at hand, the magnificent and I mean that sincerely, George Bray. I don't think there's anyone in the Northeast who George takes second place to in terms of knowledge of French and Indian War history and also of the reenacting that he has done. I know many reenactors are in the audience here who know George from that. It's funny, you know, one of the things that not a lot of people know is that Lieutenant Colonel George Monroe, so well known from Last of the Mohegans and from being the commander at Fort William Henry, is interred at St. Peter's Hospital, St. Peter's Church in downtown Albany, as is Lord Howe. And so I never thought that Colonel Monroe kind of gets the attention that he deserves, both, you know, particularly for his role here at Fort William Henry and just the heartbreak that was, you know, the fictionalized account of Last of the Mohegans was brought forward by James Fenimore Cooper and from so many movie versions of that. And so I actually called George beginning of this year and said, George, you're knowledgeable of you know, French and Indian War historians. Whom would you recommend speak about George Monroe? And he was kind of upset. Me, he said. And I said, okay, I mean, he's based in Rochester, so I don't know how far east he comes, but I know he's expert in certainly the Mohawk Valley history and up into Ontario, Quebec, and elsewhere. And we've seen him certainly at places like Crown Point and Rogers Island through the years, but we're glad. And it was kind of a loaded question. I was kind of hoping he'd say himself. But here he is, and the hope is, I have no doubt that you're going to just, your socks are being knocked off by what he presents to you today. And we're hoping to bring him back next year to talk about Lord Howe. I'm very proud and very excited to welcome on behalf of both the French and Indian War Society and the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, George Bray III. George.
Is the microphone working? Yes, okay, good. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, and I also want to thank John for the fine introduction, overwhelming introduction, and also Kathy and everyone involved. Andrew, he's here somewhere, I don't know where, but thank you, Andrew, for what you were doing for me as well, and everyone else involved. I don't know if you were, yeah, but if you were, also you. So thank you all for coming. It's nice to see a lot of friends here, and I want to start tonight by showing just this first slide that Colonel Monroe had. You'll see throughout the lecture that his name is spelled different ways. I chose M-U-R-N-O because that's the Scottish background. He was Scottish by descent, but he was born in Ireland. But that's the spelling that I've chosen, but you'll also see it throughout the lecture in original documents and stuff spelled differently. Also, I would ask that you would indulge me for a moment or two, because unfortunately, a lot of you knew, or not unfortunately you knew him, but unfortunately a friend of ours that a lot of you knew, I want to say, recently died, Chuck Vandry, and he was a very good friend of mine as well, and I was deeply shocked to hear of his death, so I want to give him a little recognition before I start. And one other person that you may or may not have known, who was also a friend of mine, was René Chartrand, who has written many, many books over the years on many different military subjects. I just threw up two of his books. He was a company fellow of military historians as I am, and he'll be deeply missed. So we lost two fine people recently. All right, so we'll talk about Colonel Monroe now. Colonel Monroe, like I said, or like John said, I should say, he's well known, of course, for the movie and the book here at Fort William Henry. The picture, of course, is the actor, I forgot his name, that played Colonel Monroe. And the latest movie, of course, was the one with Daniel Day-Lewis. Most people know Monroe that way. There's a lot of inaccuracies in his representation in the book and in the movies, and I hope tonight to be able to dispel some of them and put a little flesh and bones on Colonel Monroe. So we'll start with a brief biography of him. His father was also known as George Monroe. He was a soldier in the British Army, and his mother, Margaret Bruce, they were stationed in Ireland where he was born. Unfortunately, we don't know when he was born, but we surmise it was around 1700 due to the dates of his commission as an ensign. He was born in Cloughan, Ireland. Now, you know in the movie, and I guess in the story, Last of the Bohemians, supposedly 2 daughters come to visit him during the siege. In fact, that never happened. That's one of the myths, if you will. However, a 1759 will that was later adjudicated after his death indicated that he had 3 reputed children who were minors. And Ben Hughes, in his book, The Siege of Fort William Henry, names them as George, Sackville, and Jane. I'm not certain where he got that from, but I use that as my reference. He would serve his entire military career in the 35th Regiment of Foot, which was known as Colonel Charles Otway's regiment. During the French and Indian War, all regiments had numbers, but they were also known as well by the commanders' names. I show the dates of his promotions up there, and of course, up until the time of his death, the highest rank he got was Lieutenant Colonel. So all the dates are there. You can see he'd been a Lieutenant Colonel for a number of years before he even came here. He did request in his will that no marker or any type of honor be made at his grave site, and a relative was able to later actually locate where he was buried, and we'll discuss that later, of course, toward the end of the lecture. So the 35th Regiment of Foot traces its origins back to 1701 and was designated as the 35th Regiment of Foot in 1751. Like all British regiments at the time, as I said, they were also referred to by the commander's name, in this case Otway's, and they bore the nickname the Old Buffs. Charles Otway himself, the colonel, did not accompany his regiment to North America, and that wasn't uncommon. Many of the colonels did not come to North America, so that left the lieutenant colonel in charge of the regiment, which is why Monroe was in command. The regiment, like many, was comprised of 10 companies, and they were on the Irish, what was known as the Irish establishment initially, meaning they were in Ireland, and they were a lower number of troops assigned to a regiment in Ireland. Consequently, when the regiment was going to be mobilized to come to North America, they started to pull men from some of the other Irish regiments to build up their numbers, and then when they came to England, they would get more recruits by offering lifelong convicts lifelong service in the military in place of that, and they also used the Press Act to impress men as well. I think I show, no I didn't, I'm sorry. I do show the uniform and all up there. The composition was a colonel, the lieutenant colonel, and major each had a company. The colonel's regiment, company would have been commanded by what was known as a captain lieutenant. And then they had an ensign, a lieutenant, an ensign, 3 sergeants, 3 corporals, 2 drummers, and 70 privates, for a total of 815 men when they were brought over to the British establishment. And they would later be authorized to have up to 1,000 men, officers included. And here you see the uniform of the regiment. It's obviously the basic red uniform, but the facings are orange. And the musicians, you can see they wear what's called the reverse colors, so their uniform is primarily orange. The regimental lace, each regiment, the way you identify it, besides its facing colors, is by the regimental lace, and that's pictured up there at the top. The grenadier, of course, wears a mitre cap. It's got the horse of Hanover, as does the musician, and the GR, meaning Georgius Rex, or King George, or King George II in this case, and their flags and what their drum would look like. So the monogram GR2 means King George II. Okay, so the regiment, along with the 42nd Highland Regiment, which later becomes known as the Black Watch, or then it was known also as Lord John Murray's Regiment, they depart from Cork, Ireland for England on March 3rd of 1756. And then on March 11th, they arrive aboard 6 transports in Plymouth, England after a 45-day passage. And here are 2 contemporary sources that tell us this very fact. So, and another picture of one of the soldiers of the 35th there as well. Once they get to Plymouth, they're actually, did I miss a slide? I think I might have, go back a minute. Oops, previous, I missed a slide, looks like I might have. Nope, yes I didn't, sorry. Okay, so the regiment, once it gets to Plymouth, they actually put them up in private homes, and they're there till April 11th. They then go to get on board their vessels, their transports, and their transports are going to be the Essex, the Fortress, and the Sidon. They board on the 11th, but it's 4 days later before they actually sail for North America. So here's some documentation for that. And they come to North America under the command, the squadron is under the command of Commodore Charles Holmes, as I show his picture there. They initially get to Sandy Hook, New Jersey on June 15th, and then the transports for the 35th and 42nd enter New York Harbor the following day after a 9-week voyage from Plymouth. On board is also Major General James Abercrombie, who is at that point, the Commander-in-Chief for the Army in North America, and also some other officers of the 60th Regiment of Foot, or Royal Americans, arrive with them as well. And we'll hear a little bit about the 60th later as well. This slide shows that there's Colonel Monroe there. You can see him. I put a picture of Lieutenant Richard Bailey in his uniform on the original portrait of the 35th Regiment. His name is listed there in the list. And then I also show a book that was published. It's a Lieutenant William Bamford, whose name also appears. That journal talks about the 35th Regiment through the war, and it was recently published from an original that you can actually see online as well. And I'll have a picture of that a little later on. Notice somebody else arrives with the people I've already mentioned, and that's our good friend Major General Webb, Daniel Webb. And I think you all know General Webb. Fort Edward, who didn't want to send anybody up to help Colonel Monroe, he comes on board too. Also, you might notice the handsome refreshments. The oxen they were provided, the officers and enlisted, were oxen, sheep, fowls, strawberries, cherries, peas, etc., which proved a very acceptable present. So when they arrived, they were well fed and well received, I guess, according to that newspaper article. 2 transports had not yet arrived, and they would later arrive with more men from the 35th on board. And then there was another contingent that actually left in mid-April, and they arrived in August under Major Henry Fletcher, who we'll hear about later too. He was the one that would be second in command of the regiment at the time. He brought along the regimental baggage as well as additional troops. They then arrived in Albany. According to the New York Mercury, they all sailed for Albany on June 19th, arrived on June 26th. Charlotte Brown, who was the matron in the Albany Hospital, wrote in her journal that on July 1st, 2 of the regiments of Colonel Otway's and Abercrombie's arrived from England. So she may have been referring to the remainder of the regiment that were on those other transports that hadn't arrived yet. And note here, the soldiers are quartered in the homes of the civilian populace. The Quartering Act is, you know, we went to war in the American Revolution over in part. The British law authorized the ability for soldiers to be placed in private homes. So it says 2, 3, and even 4 were put in a private house. Officers were normally quartered in taverns or the homes of the more affluent people. So Albany was getting crowded. They had no barracks at that time to house them, and consequently they were on the civilian populace while they were in Albany. So we have casualties for the first time, and this was really unfortunate. Abercrombie decides, I'm going to take a ride to the Cohoes Falls and, of course, the Mohawk River. So he and a number of gentlemen, and I would surmise that Webb and Monroe were probably amongst those gentlemen, they go marching off to Cohoes Falls, and of course the soldiers, guard of 24 of them divided in 3 squads of 8 men each, on a hot day, very hot day apparently, were trying to keep up with the officers on horseback, which resulted in a Highlander being struck down dead by the heat, along with 2 soldiers of the 35th, and I'm surmising they may have been grenadiers. And then other soldiers suffered badly from the heat as well, and probably included others from the 35th, though it doesn't, I don't have documentation to prove who was who there, or whether any of those might have died as a result. And then the day before, the men in one of the companies, they were firing at a mark when one of the guns went off by accident, and 2 men get shot through the thigh. Luckily, they weren't mortally killed, but nonetheless, another misfortune for the regiment. So one has to wonder what effects these incidents might have had on Colonel Monroe and the regiment. And it indicates, of course, that they didn't have a lot of training, and that's going to be reflected on the next slide. So Lord Loudon, who now is Commander-in-Chief, having superseded Abercrombie once he arrived here in North America, he writes to the Duke of Cumberland on October 2nd, stating that Colonel Monroe does what he can to keep the regiment right, but they must have examples made before they will do it. None of them have been in any service, and these men are a large body, but the most unruly I've ever met, and I think by the next campaign I shall have to make the pressed men better than the old ones. And the officers want full as much to be reclaimed as the men, and I have not hitherto been able to bring them to act like other troops. They have overdrawn their provisions, they have lost the livestock I delivered to them, and they have taken others in their place, and I've ordered all to be repaid to the last shilling. Cumberland would write back in a private portion of a letter dated from St. James on December 2nd as to Otway's regiment. I'm not surprised at the scandalous account you give me of them. They have never seen any manner of service, and I'm afraid your letter convinces me of what I've heard before, that it was composed of a set of ignorant, undisciplined officers, and until you make examples of the officers, you will never make a regiment of it. So you can see the regiment and the officers, Monroe included, didn't have a very good reputation with the higher-ups. And Loudon also revealed that Colonel Monroe was an old officer and never served in a combat role prior to arriving here in North America. And of course, he would be subordinate, as I mentioned, to Daniel Webb at Fort Edward. It's too bad that Loudon had this opinion, because in reality, Loudon ends up taking most of the, or all of the good troops, or what he considered good troops, off to Halifax in 57, and he's leaving these guys here because he doesn't think they're adequate, and he also feels, oh, there'll be no attack on this sector, you know, everybody's going off to Quebec, all the enemy are going there, because he had gotten a report from the escaped Rogers Ranger sergeant that the French up in Canada were all going to Quebec. So he assumed, okay, I'm going to Halifax, the enemy will be off in that sector, and you'll be safe here. You'll only have to deal with the garrisons at Crown Point, or the garrisons at Ticonderoga, and maybe some scouting parties, but other than that, you'll be fine. Obviously, a tactical error. And then he also talked more about there being raw officers and soldiers, and it's just more of the degrading of the unit in his words. But what's interesting is they're having deserters, and he had 6 of them, he said, go together to the French. 2 of them, after losing themselves in the wood and being starved with hunger, surrendered to some of the parties above, and I tried and hanged them directly. There were 4 others, however, that were taken at Wood Creek. They had left Albany. This is while the regiment's still in Albany, and they were taken up by our ranging companies. They are not yet come to my length. Well, it turns out that those ranging companies that were Rogers Rangers, Captain Rogers in his journal mentions that these 4 were going to the enemy, and that he sent them back to Fort Edward with part of a detachment of Rangers under the command of Lieutenant John Stark, who of course was his second in command and who would be much famous even later in the Revolutionary War. Dr. Amy Cutter, who attended the Rangers on Rogers Island, mentions in his journal on September 20th that Captain Stark brought in 4 deserters who went from Albany and had got as far as Wood Creek, Fort Ticonderoga, and that they were regulars. And perhaps one of them was John Phillips in the deserter report on the slide. And then he goes on saying that the 4 were hung on the 5th, perhaps, or the 4 were hung on the 5th, perhaps, because Cutter said in his journal on October 12th, 4 regulars were hung on the 5th, but also that 1 broke the rope twice and was reprieved. That had to be quite an experience for that guy, huh? Okay, so now Loudon has this scheme that he's going to improve the regiment. How's he going to do that? He tells Cumberland on November 22nd, writing from Albany, that they would be quartered in Albany for the winter, and that the 44th and 48th regiments would be kind of looking after them, and General Abercrombie. And that he hoped that they would be doing their duty along with the officers and men of those regiments, and by the next campaign they'd be improved, both their officers and the men. He was also picking up some good officers to fill up the lieutenancies that were vacant, and the ranks were being filled by parties that were sent to the southern provinces. However, despite his plan, desertion still occurred. And this is one of the deserter reports. Picture of a deserter there, Gary Zaboli did. I thought it was a good rendition of what was going on here. And you might notice in there that one of the deserters was from Bellows Company, again, as the one was previously that I showed on the slide, and also one was from Colonel Monroe's company. So we're still having discipline problems, unfortunately. Okay, now the regiment is going to march for Fort William Henry. As you probably know, in March of 1757, the French attempt to take Fort William Henry unsuccessfully after a 4-day siege. And during that time, Monroe marches from Albany up to Fort William Henry, along with Major Fletcher. They each command 2 segments or divisions that are marching up. Monroe ends up with 5 companies arriving here at Fort William Henry on March 27th, and then another company would arrive before the siege. On the other hand, Fletcher's company Fletcher's detachment, if you will, 4 companies, they get stationed at Fort William Henry. and he takes command at Fort William Henry. And these are some of the activities that were going on while they were at Fort Edward. Such things as firing at marks, performing manual exercises, all the things that would make them more effective on a battlefield. Mr. Welch is involved in the training. I don't know if he was an officer or a sergeant. I've got to do a little more research into that. And then the articles of war were read to them, and they were reminded of what penalties they would face if they violated any of the provisions of it. And then there was a skirmish outside the Fort Edward on July 23rd, and they lost a Sergeant Felton, one of their sergeants in that particular engagement. So prior to the arrival of the French Army on July 29th, Webb, along with engineer John Montresor, James Furness, they go up to Fort William Henry to examine the fortifications. And when they get up, they find that the 6 companies of the 35th Regiment were encamped at a distance from the fort under a hill in such a manner that it may easily have been cut off. It was therefore judged necessary to remove the encampment as soon as possible and to take possession of the eminence, which was set about the next day, and breastworks of logs were erected. And of course that was erected over where Lake George Battlefield Park is now. And I take this slide to show you the situation when the French do attack. Monroe, unlike the movie again, is not in the fort. He's over at the entrenched camp, as is Colonel Young, John Young of the Royal American Regiment. And the person left in command at the fort is actually Captain John Ormsby of the 35th Regiment. During the siege, he gets wounded. Actually, Young gets wounded as well during the siege. So I'm not going to talk about the siege. A lot of you know about the siege anyway. This is more, obviously I'm talking about the regiment and Monroe in particular where I can, so I want to talk about what Monroe was doing during the siege. So initially when Montcalm set up his siege works to start with and cut off William Henry from Fort Edward, about 3 p.m. he sends out his aide-de-camp to Monroe requesting the surrender, and he wanted to surrender supposedly so he could still retain his natives at that point. That was what he said. It's shown in the newspaper account. Monroe declines the offer, saying he'd defend the fort and the entrenchment while he still had a man able to fire a gun. And during the siege, he threatened any man who would act cowardly or suggest surrender, that he would hang them over the walls of the fort. So he was very determined to defend the fort to the last. The siege lasts, as I show here, during time frame of August 3rd through 9th, and then would surrender, unfortunately. Now, what was Monroe doing during the siege? I won't read these, you may if you want. Just put down a series of correspondence that he sent several times throughout the siege to Colonel Monroe, General Webb, and did not get any succor, of course, from General Webb. But he was giving him intelligence about what the French were up to. He was giving him intelligence on the guns that were bursting at the fort, and the casualties and all that, and of course expecting to get relief, which again, of course, didn't come. So he was busy writing during that time, as he defended the fort and the